barem cijelo stoljeće potiču maštu ljudi. Čemu su služili? Tko ih je i kada podizao? Poznati svjetski istraživač i pokretač pokreta Ubuntu, Michael Tehnologija, s njima se susreo istražujući sumerske izvještaje o Anunnakijima, koji su stvorili čovjeka kako bi im pomagao pri vađenju zlata iz južnoafričkih rudnika. S vremenom Tehnologija je došao do zaključka da su megaliti dio tehnološke ostavštine, koja je koristila zvuk kao oružje i kao izvor energije. Danas u ostalom iznova otkrivamo tehnološke potencijale zvuka. O tome će biti riječi na mjestu gdje se ponekad spajaju prošlost i budućnost. Na rubu znanosti.
Yeah, thank you very much, Greta. When you start looking into origins of humankind and trying to answer the three critical questions, who are we, where do we come from, why are we here, the questions that most of us have asked ourselves at some stage of our lives, and you start digging through the layers and layers of information into the ancient past, at some stage you realize that pretty much all ancient cultures and all ancient civilizations share the philosophy or the knowledge that creation started with some sort of sound or resonance. And the evidence is everywhere. The more you dig, the more you come across this evidence that hits you in the face time after time. And the most famous example is in the Bible. You know, the most popular book of all times. The Bible has sold more books than any other book in human history. And the Bible tells us that God said, let there be light. So even encoded in the Bible, it tells us that it was the sound of the Creator that brought forth everything in creation. In Hinduism and Buddhism, we have the the sound, the primordial sound and resonance. When I say sound, it actually means resonance that brings forth the sound with it. And then the Hindu story talks about Vishnu that awoke from a deep sleep and brought forth the resonance, through resonance, everything in creation. The Egyptians believed that the universe was sung into creation. The Aboriginal story of the original people of Australia talks about time began when the supernatural beings broke through the surface of the earth and brought into existence all the features of the surface of the earth with sound and resonance, with a song, with three sacred songs. So sooner or later, every researcher will come across this particular fact and information, that the common link to all religions and creation is sound and resonance. Well, I didn't really pay attention to it. My attention was drawn to it by the discoveries that I was making in South Africa around the ancient stone ruins. And what I found there was that the stones have very strong acoustic properties. And that made me realize that, hold on, this is not just a coincidence or an accident. This is something that was done on purpose and with some sort of plan. And then you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together and you realize very quickly that this is the same story throughout all of human history. Sound and resonance are the foundations or the source of all creation. And when I started realizing that the stone tools and artifacts that I was collecting had all connections to sound and resonance, I realized that there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And then you add to it the fact that we're dealing with crystalline substance, silica dioxide, crystals, and all the properties that silica and crystals have, and that just opens up the field of research dramatically. And, you know, if you're not conscious enough about what it is that you're discovering, it's just going to pass you by, and you're not going to be able to make the connections. And this is what became very evident to me, that when you start researching the ancient civilizations of the world, origins of humankind, you've got to be prepared to go and look in all different directions. You've got to look at from astronomy to astrology to science to physics to mathematics to chemistry to geology to history, and see how all these stories connect, because we live in a world where everything is compartmentalized, everything is broken up into sections, and you only study this and you then study that. So many of our so-called experts in certain fields have no knowledge of astronomy or quantum physics. So it's very difficult for our so-called experts to be able to connect the dots from one area to another. And this has been fundamentally a problem with many of the discoveries that we've made, because those people that make these discoveries aren't capable of connecting the dots because they haven't really gone and done the work or the research, crossing the divides that we have created ourselves in our education system. Well, if sound is the source of all creation, then obviously it means that we can and should be able to do everything with sound and with resonance. And that's exactly what it is. You know, sound can levitate. Sound cures all disease. Sound creates light. Sound can make things invisible. Sound can generate DNA. Sound brings forth supercluster galaxies. Sound can the Native American medicine men use the cross in a circle, which represents sound, for healing. Cymatics is a phenomenal area of science and research to study, because it really shows us how this invisible and untouchable thing called sound, even the sound that we make with our mouths when we speak, how that brings forth physical form, physical shape. So it gives us an indication that we can create physical form even with our voices. When you put sand on a metal plate, you put sound frequencies through the metal plate through a speaker, and the frequency goes from a low frequency to a high frequency. You see a sequence of different beautiful patterns and shapes. They're known as cymatic patterns or cymatics that change. Every sound frequency has a specific shape and a form to it. And it goes from the very large, the lower the frequency, the simpler and larger the patterns are, and the higher the frequency, the more complex the patterns are. And this goes on forever. Because this is the fundamental structure of matter that comes from the resonance and the sound that brings it into creation. The sonoscope is a tool that was created by or invented by Eric Larson in the United States, and it's a phenomenal device that actually shows us how powerful our voice is and how many different infinite number of shapes and physical form our voice actually creates when we speak. So it just tells us that we are divine creators. We can and should be able to create with our sound and with our voice. The way that we read in history, wizards used to be able to create things and cast spells and move things around. We have that tool in our voice, and the sound is the tool that we have built into this machine called the human body. Well, Jenny's groundbreaking documentary in the 1960s about cymatics is really a wake-up call for everybody to realize how important sound is in our lives and in our reality and in the creation process to create and bring forth the shapes and the landscapes and everything in reality, from the structure of trees to the landscapes that we find ourselves in, and everything around us on this planet and around us in all of creation. And that documentary is highly recommended for everyone to watch. But the great story of Vishnu, the creation story, the Hindu creation story of Vishnu, slept undisturbed by sound and motion. From the depths, a humming sound began, throbbing with energy, filling the emptiness. And then it says, Vishnu awoke, the night had ended. It's exactly the same as the Bible says, God said, let there be light. It talks about the sound coming forth first, and then the sound giving rise to light. So it shows you there's a great example how all ancient cultures talk about sound and resonance being the primordial source of things. And then you connect it to the original people of Australia talking about the supernatural beings broke through the surface of the earth and moved about the earth, bringing forth the landscapes and the features of the planet as we know it. This all talks about sound moving through the surface of the earth and the vibration of the sound creating the shapes on top of the earth, the way we see sand on a metal plate forming different shapes. And Hans Jenny's video shows dry powder, like a podium powder, moving about, forming beautiful bubbles and mountains and landscapes and valleys, the same way that we see the surface of the earth. It is quite spectacular. The Ark of the Covenant is probably one of the most famous examples of advanced technology that was dictated by the God to Moses and to Aaron. And the construction of the Ark of the Covenant was very precise, very detailed of how to build it, what to do, how to cut the wood, how to layer it with gold, and they had to stick exactly to that. And then what do they do with the Ark of the Covenant? Well, the Bible tells us that the ark never touches the ground. The ark always moves and levitates, hovers above the ground. The weight of the ark was too heavy for 4 people or even 6 or 8 people to carry. It weighed between 1.5 and 3 tons. Depends on how you do the mathematics. So even 8 people are not going to carry an ark weighing 3 tons. So clearly the handlebars for it were not handlebars but were antennae. And then the Bible tells us that Moses had to sit on top of the ark in a mercy seat under the wings of the cherubim, under the wings of the angels, and from there God would speak to him and tell him what to tell the Israelites. So clearly it tells us that the ark is a communication device. And then furthermore, we all know that the ark brought down the walls of Jericho, and there was very specific instructions of what what they had to do. They had to march around 6 times around the walls, and on the 7th time, the army had to give a big shout, all shout together, and a loud blast from the trumpets. So it's all telling us to do with sound and resonance that brought down the walls of Jericho. And then the ark was used in battle, in military, where it sent out huge sparks and lightning bolts that killed large armies and large number of men. So it was a communication device, a levitation device, and a weapon of mass destruction, if you want to call it that. John Keely is one of the great examples of how advanced knowledge and research and information is removed from the world by the elite, because John Keely achieved so many great and amazing things, and all to do with sound and resonance. He was drilling holes, precision holes into very, very hard rock with sound. He was levitating metal objects and various other objects with sound. He was crushing giant blocks of stone with sound frequencies into the finest powder imaginable, which today is not possible. The mining industry today has a big problem crushing the ore that they get out of the ground into fine powder so they can extract the ore. John Keely was doing all of this in 1888 already with sound, using sound and resonance. And that just shows you how that information is very, very strictly controlled by the elite. Well, there are simple experiments that people can do themselves. You know, you can attach a little LED light to a big speaker and expose the speaker to light noise, and you'll find that it actually lights up the little LED light. Some of my friends have done this with their Christmas lights, and it's a big sort of entertainment part of their Christmas. But the Bible tells us very clearly, God said, let there be light. So once again, we've got to listen to what the ancients tell us. And don't think that they were just stupid. They didn't know what they were talking about. They were giving us very specific and advanced knowledge in their writing and in their oral tradition. So when it says God said, let there be light, it tells us that the sound came forth from creation and then brought forth the light that then gives us the electromagnetic universe as we see it today. So what it tells us is that sound is the precursor to the electromagnetic universe and things in creation as we perceive it today, visible and invisible. Well, one of the best examples for people to view, and they can see this for themselves on the internet, is a little example or an experiment that was done by David Deek. And it just shows you, it's a closed chamber, it's a square chamber about 30 by 30 centimeters, exposed to 3 sources of sound, and they levitate very light polystyrene items in the center of it with 3 sources of sound. So that shows you how sound can make things levitate. And the only thing here is it's actually a trick. It's a trap, and I want people to be very aware of this. This is not how you levitate very large and heavy objects. This is just using the pressure waves of 2 standing waves, sound waves, standing waves, and you trap these light objects in the pressure waves of the sound. So that's just to show you how we can manipulate sound today on a small scale. But if you want to levitate large objects, big 20-ton, 30-ton, 100-ton, 1,000-ton blocks, it doesn't matter how much it weighs. For that, you're going to have to use laser technology or hypersound, when sound moves beyond the speed of light. And I know that's a thing that many people go, what? Sound moves beyond the speed of light? Yes, it's one of the best kept secrets in science today and discovery. When you use phaser technology or phaser beams that are really vortex fields, and one of the very well studied and documented effects of a vortex field is that a vortex field distorts gravity around it. And that's how you levitate very big and large objects, is through creating a gravity-free zone around the beam of sound. In explaining the breathing process that all of us do all the time to stay alive, we realize that our bodies are actually advanced technology itself. You know, we live, we exist, our souls are embedded in this body, which is the highest level of advanced technology, and it's all to do with natural laws of nature, what some would call biomimicry, right? We try and create and build things in science and engineering, and often we mimic and imitate nature around us, and we forget to look at ourselves. So this is one of the probably the most critical discoveries that I've made in the last 2 years or so, is the fact that the air that we breathe is actually driven by sound. And it's the sound of the air we breathe that energizes the oxygen in our lungs. Because as we breathe in, the air speeds up, and the sound speeds up. It goes faster and faster, from bigger to smaller and smaller and smaller apertures, as it goes from the trachea to the bronchi, bronchioli, and eventually alveoli. By the time the air and the sound of the air we breathe, remember, there's a lot of noise we make when we breathe. So by the time the sound reaches the alveoli, it's actually moving at hypersound speeds. It's moving beyond the speed of light, and it's highly, highly charged. And it is that sound and the energy of the sound that energizes the oxygen in our lungs. And that oxygen then takes the energy into our bloodstream, and that energy is then used in our body, upon which the oxygen is expelled. And it goes through the same process again. Otherwise, it makes no sense how it is that we actually survive, because we don't use the oxygen. The oxygen goes in and the oxygen goes out. The oxygen is just a carrier of the energy. So now we know how the oxygen is charged. It is charged by the sound of the air that we breathe. Royal Raymond Rife is one of the greatest examples of how we can cure all disease with sound and resonance. You know, I spent 5 years at medical school in Johannesburg studying pharmaceutics. Not once did they ever tell us anything about Royal Raymond Rife. Now, that doesn't make any sense, does it? It just shows you how they're trying to hide, how the pharmaceutical companies and the drug cartels are hiding knowledge and information, because curing disease is not good for business. So once you start curing people of disease, they're not going to be coming back to buy drugs from me. So keeping people sustained on constant usage of pharmaceutical medication is the plan of action. So Royal Raymond Rife's discovery in the 1920s and 30s was a huge breakthrough that was very quickly removed from the global knowledge pool so that people weren't aware of it. It is well documented that Royal Raymond Rife cured cancer at will. The microscopes that he created were the first microscopes that could actually see living cells under the microscope. So they could actually see what was happening to the cells when you expose them to certain frequencies. And remember, everything has its own prime resonance frequency. That's what this is all about. That's what sound and resonance is all about. Understanding the prime resonance frequency. Star Trek fans will know it as the prime directive. But that's a whole other discussion as to why you cannot breach the prime directive. It's like saying you're breaching the prime resonance frequency of creation. You're going against the resonance of everything in creation, and that cannot happen. So if you understand the prime resonance frequency of a cancer cell, you can either make it grow bigger or you can destroy it. And that's exactly what Royal Raymond Rife discovered. And he cured at will all kinds of cancers, a whole cancer ward full of cancer patients that he cured completely. And that information has been removed. If you think that it hasn't been done over and over again, you'd be mistaken. There'd be many researchers and inventors that have rediscovered this, but every time they bring this forth, they either disappear, or they are paid off, or the invention is bought, and that information is then hidden by the pharmaceutical industry. Very recently, a music professor from Skidmore College in the USA in 2011 showed, and he did a TED talk on this, he showed how they discovered in the music department that then started doing research with the labs at the university, how they used sound to destroy cancer cells, leukemia cells, pancreatic cells, ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, brain tumors, all kinds of cancers that they destroyed with sound frequencies, specific sound frequencies. The one thing that he does tell us in the little TED talk is that they found that sound frequencies between 100,000 and 300,000 hertz are particularly effective on destroying cancer cells. So that will give the independent researchers out there some direction in which to go and do some more research. Because the sooner we can actually give a real cure for cancer and a cure for disease by using sound to the people of the world, the sooner we can eliminate millions and millions of people that suffer of pain and debilitating illnesses that we can and should be able to cure. But all this stuff is hidden from humanity by the pharmaceutical industry. In 2003, NASA released the information that they recorded the lowest sound frequency that they've ever recorded in space. Now, that does two things. First of all, it tells us that they've recorded sound frequencies from space before, because if they say this is the lowest frequency we've ever recorded, means they've been recording sound frequencies from space before, and this is not unusual. But this is the lowest one they ever recorded, and it comes from the Perseus supercluster galaxy. It's about 250 million light years away from us. 250 million light years is just around the corner. It's not very far. But if you really understand that we can traverse space and time easily once we understand what the hell is going on. So what they measured is that at the center of this supercluster of galaxies is a giant black hole that emanates this sound frequency. And out of this seemed to come this supercluster of galaxies. And this sound resonance, this lowest note, which incidentally they tell us it resonates at B flat in music terms, which is fascinating, because into that comes a whole another beautiful level of arguments that we can go into. But it resonates at B flat. And when you look at the photographs of the images of NASA of the supercluster galaxy, it looks just like the lycopodium powder on a metal plate in Hans Jenny's documentary from the 1960s, showing how sound resonates the lycopodium powder, and it shows you the creation of surfaces on planet Earth. But here, it's just a huge scale, 57 octaves lower than middle C. So it's 1 million billion times lower. The frequency is 1 million billion times lower than the frequency of our ability to hear. So it just shows you, the lower the frequency, the bigger the shapes that are created. And there is the most perfect example, how matter gets brought into creation from sound. And it seems to come from the center of a giant black hole. And that, once again, opens up another very important argument or a debate about what black holes are and what happens when you go through a black hole. It's actually going into different dimensions, and that black holes or wormholes or these vortexes can be used for moving from one dimension to another and for the creation of energy, and a very exciting discussion that one can have on that. To answer that question, let's go back to what the ancient civilizations tell us. God said, let there be light. If sound is the source of all creation, including light, then sound must move faster than the speed of light. Light is just one element of sound that has a finite speed at which it moves through this creation. But we don't yet know everything about light, so let's not get too deep into that. But the sound thing is getting more and more interesting because we're starting to really get to understand what the sound and resonance of creation is all about. In 2005 at Middle Tennessee State University, a number of students, which I think consisted of some of the university students and also some students from the high school nearby, actually did an experiment, and they propelled sound beyond the speed of light to move several times as fast as the speed of light. Not just faster, but many times faster than the speed of light. And this was published in the American Institute of Physics magazine in 2007, I believe, and then very quickly put away and hidden. Because, when you start telling people and universities and students that sound can travel beyond the speed of light, this opens up our way of thinking outside the box, and that's not good for business, once again, for those that are trying to keep knowledge and information under their control. So some people are saying, well, how is that possible? Because we don't really understand what sound is. We think of sound as the stuff that we deal with here. When I talk to you, the sound moving beyond the sound barrier, breaking the sound barrier, and all that. That's not all. That's just one aspect of sound. The way that we perceive sound and resonance in this reality, in this density, on this planet. But outside and away from this planet, under different conditions, sound behaves very differently. Resonance behaves very differently. It is the foundation of all creation. So we've got to go and understand, learn a lot more about what sound is, how it works, and how this resonance brings forth this thing that we call sound. But even if you look at explaining how sound moves faster than the speed of light, in this reality, all we have to do is look at how light behaves and how sound behaves. When you put light through a medium, through a crystal prism, we all have seen this experiment at school. You put the light in, the light beam in, and it breaks it down into the colors of the rainbow. It means it's slowing the light down and showing us the different colors of the light. So light through a medium is slowed down. When you put sound into a medium, it speeds up. Sound travels several times faster in water than it does through the air. The denser the medium, the faster the speed of sound, even in this reality. So if you, in this reality, imagine an infinitely dense medium, that means that sound will travel infinitely fast through the infinitely dense medium. Now, is there an infinitely dense medium? Yes, there is. Inside the center of a black hole, which is referred to by some researchers as the vacuum, or the source of all things. If you go into the black hole, you go through that vortex of the black hole, through that event horizon, and you disappear into that black hole, that vacuum has been calculated to be infinitely dense. The density of vacuum is infinite, and many papers have been written on that. So once you go through this reality that we find around ourselves in this creation, through every atom in our body, every molecule, every atom that makes up every molecule, at the center of that atom is a little black hole that brings forth the resonance that makes up that atom. And that resonance comes out of the vacuum, out of the fabric of creation, out of the consciousness field, or the morphogenetic field. And out of that morphogenetic field, which is infinitely dense, comes the information that brings forth the physical form that we find ourselves in. So, every time you speak, every thought you have, every word you say, goes into every atom in your body. The resonance of what you say goes into every atom of your body, into every atom of the air around you, into the nucleus of that atom, and it goes into the morphogenetic field whose density is infinite, which means that every thought you have, everything you say, goes instantly and infinitely into everything and covers all areas of creation. That's how sound moves beyond the speed of light. Well, the spontaneous generation of DNA out of sound remains for me one of the most important and critical breakthrough discoveries that we've had in the last 5 years. In 2011, Dr. Luc Montagnier in France spontaneously generated DNA by exposing a test tube of water with, that was previously exposed to DNA, but then the DNA was removed so that it had the essence of the DNA in it. And then he exposed it to a sound frequency, and within several hours, DNA spontaneously materialized. And this is spectacular, because and once again, so sound can manifest DNA. And when you realize what DNA is, in our DNA, we have encoded every aspect of our body. Everything about us is encoded in our DNA. And the DNA molecule, if you look at it, is a spiral as well. So it actually follows the laws of all natural sound principles. The vortex field, the spiral. So in our DNA, in the spiral of the DNA is encoded everything that we have. So it tells us that that sound frequency that created the DNA had encoded in it billions and trillions of smaller fractals of sound frequencies and sound resonances that could encode the DNA with all that information. So it's not just one frequency, but it's an infinite number of fractals that make up that one frequency. And this is why the study of sound and resonance is so fundamental to us starting to understand who we are, how we fit into everything, how everything is connected through the sound and resonance. Nothing is separate. Everything is connected. And the creation and the spontaneous generation of DNA by Luc Montagnier is, for me, the greatest example that we have in science today that shows us this without any question. If you look at hurricanes and the way they spiral and move around, again, they just follow the laws of nature, and everything in creation that spirals, everything moves in a spiral fashion. Sound doesn't just travel in a straight line. Everything moves in a spiral, the way that the electrons move around the center of the atom, and so forth. If you look at our planets around the sun, and the sun moves, we're never standing still. The sun is moving through space, and the planets are being dragged along by the sun in actuality. And the same goes with our galaxy. The whole galaxy is a giant spiral. If you look at the formation of a hurricane from space, it's a giant spiral that keeps moving around. So, and all of this has a resonance, a deep resonance that brings this into creation, and is the cause for all this activity, is the sound and resonance. So, therefore, it stands to reason that if we know how to manipulate sound and resonance, we can create hurricanes, we can create rain, we can create clouds, we can create anything we want with sound and resonance. And to that argument, I think it was in 2003, that a bunch of guys applied for a patent to patent a device that can create hurricanes and tornadoes, and by manipulating them, creating rain. And that patent, as far as I know, stands today. A patent for the creation of hurricanes through sound and resonance. Well, it was in August 2014, I believe, that Lawrence Berkeley Laboratories released information that they discovered a way to use sound as a cloak of invisibility, and that they understood, they learned how to manipulate sound to make things invisible by creating specific frequencies around an object that makes that object invisible. And we're going to be discovering more and more of this ability to use sound. And if you look at the science fiction movies and people that have had experiences with UFOs or ETs, or they often describe that they heard a sound and suddenly this UFO appeared. And it was not there, and suddenly it's there. And there was a humming noise or a humming sound. Right? So it tells us that sound and resonance is connected to our ability to bring things into visibility or to make them disappear. Well, Viktor Grebennikov used the wings of insects to create a levitation platform. And he pasted all these insect wings at the bottom of his famous device. It was probably about, 2 feet by 2 feet, or 50 by 50 centimeters, or something like that. And on this platform, he exposed it to certain sound frequencies, resonance. And by manipulating the resonance, he was able to make this thing levitate. And the reports tell us that he could make this thing move beyond the speed of sound. He could actually make this levitation device move beyond the speed of sound, which is phenomenal. And a lot of information is available on Viktor Grebennikov for this, but you have to go to an understanding of what the hell is this all about. Because when you first tell people, you stick a bunch of bugs' wings, insect wings onto a piece of wood and it can levitate, people think you're crazy. No, not that quick. Because when you see how some insects fly, like the dragonfly or the bumblebee and many other insects whose bodies are too big to be able to fly, their wings are too small, they don't flap their wings like birds. What these insects do, and the dragonfly for me is the best example because of my recent discovery of how the system actually works, which is connected to the ancient tools and ancient stone tools and artifacts that I've been finding, and what I call the cone-shaped technology. The cones that focus the sound to create laser beams that distort gravity around them. This is the key thing here, because in the wings of dragonflies, the wings are not filled with arteries with blood. The wings are filled with tubes that carry the resonance of the wings. As the dragonfly vibrates its wings, it creates a frequency. That frequency goes into the hollow tubes that are in the wings, and all along these tubes and at the intersections of these tubes that go from big tubes to smaller tubes, all along these tubes in the wings of the dragonflies are tiny little cones that focus the sound and the resonance in a specific direction, creating laser beams or vortex fields that distort the gravity. And this is how a dragonfly flies, creating a gravity-free area around it and moving through it. And that's exactly what Viktor Grebennikov discovered. This technology in the wings of insects. And he used this to create his levitation platform. And by inserting a frequency into these wings of these insects, because whether they're removed from the insect or not, it's not blood, they're little tubes, right? So as long as you fill it with a certain frequency, it will still have the same effect. And he created his little levitation platform. It makes perfect sense, but you first have to understand what sound is and how it works. Otherwise you think, these guys are just crazy. Well, sound and the generation of free energy are inextricable. You cannot separate them, because sound is the source of all things, therefore sound must be the source of free energy. Everything in creation comes from an original source of something. And we're now discovering from looking at the giant superclusters like that Perseus supercluster, at the center of it we have a sound frequency that's creating the supercluster of galaxies. So they're telling us that sound and resonance is bringing forth into creation this billions of galaxies in a supercluster of galaxies. And so sound is at the center of creating energy all the time. Peter Davey in New Zealand was a great example until a few years ago when he died. He was boiling water with sound and resonance from the 1940s already, when he tried to lodge a patent to boil water with sound. And there is a great example in one of the New Zealand news channels where they actually showed him boiling the water with his little sound device. What I found fascinating, and the water boils instantly. You put that device into the water doesn't heat up, it boils instantly because it exposes the water molecules to the frequency at which they boil, so they instantly start to boil. Again, prime resonance frequency. If you know the prime resonance frequency of boiling water, you can boil water instantly by exposing it to that frequency. It's not about heating up the molecules. That's how we think about boiling water. What's fascinating about Peter Davey, the research that I've got, is that originally he created his device before he turned it into an electrical device. There were two bicycle bells, one smaller one inside a bigger one. And by simply ringing the bell, he calculated the frequencies and he made it a specific size. And by simply ringing the bell with his finger, he made a frequency that made the water boil instantly. Now that's advanced technology as far as we're concerned today, because any scientist will tell you it's not possible to do that. Well, it is possible. We have to step out of the box of mainstream physics. Remember that out of the vacuum, out of the center of an atom, out of the little black hole at the center of the atom, comes infinite density of sound and energy. So we have the capacity to create energy if we know how to tap into that black hole, that vacuum in the center of the atom. And then the other thing is the magnetron. A magnetron is used in modern technology, in laser beams, in microwave ovens, and a tiny little magnetron can generate so much energy that it can, in laser beams, it's used to cut metal in a split second. Laser beam, it cuts the metal in metal factories, and the magnetron is driven by resonance, by sound. It's an acoustic cavity magnetron, a resonance magnetron. So once again, sound and resonance is at the source of creating very, very high energies and laser beams, and also phaser beams, because we have giant magnetrons built in the ancient ruins and the stone circles in South Africa. They are built in the shape of magnetrons, telling us very clearly that these ancient sites were used by the sound they picked up from the resonance of Mother Earth. They converted that sound into a very powerful energy and used it for whatever the ancients were using it in Southern Africa. Edwin Scullin and his coral castle at the southern tip of Florida is, for me, one of the best examples and the best connections to ancient knowledge and ancient tools and technology. Because Edwin Scullin apparently built Coral Castle by levitating and cutting and moving these giant blocks of coral stone, which is very, very heavy, and 10-ton blocks and probably heavier, moving them around, levitating them with what was described to be ice cream cones. Now, you know, from a distance, if you see a guy standing with these cone-shaped tools, and apparently two schoolboys or school kids saw him levitating and moving these giant blocks with ice cream cones in his hands. Now, to a normal person, that'll sound like a silly story. Once again, Victor Grabenikov can levitate himself with insect wings. That sounds like a silly story, until you know that it's the tiny cones in the insect wings that create the vortex fields and the distortion of gravity. So what did Edwin Scullin do with ice cream cones? They weren't ice cream cones. They were very specific cone-shaped tools that focus sound, and it speeds up the sound until it shoots it out the front and creates a phaser beam, like a laser beam, but with sound. Laser beam you can see, so it looks, logical. But a phaser beam you can't see. So if somebody is using phaser technology and using cone-shaped tools to create phaser beams, you can't see it. So it looks like magic. So if you're moving and levitating things with cone-shaped tools, people think that this is just insanity. They can't understand it. But that's exactly how these things work. And we're starting to understand it now. And the cone-shaped tools, as were described, that were being used by Edwin Scullin, are the common denominators in all this ancient technology. I found cone-shaped tools all over the world. And the more I look, the more I find them. From the Americas, the Native American Indians, the medicine men used cone-shaped tools in their ceremony, cone-shaped tools in ancient mines in England, cone-shaped tools in Australia. The Mayas used cone-shaped tools. We have statues with Mayan deities holding cone-shaped tools in their hands. And all around the circles in southern Africa, I've been finding dozens and dozens of perfect cone-shaped tools that at first didn't make any sense. Now we understand, because all the ancient ruins and stone circles are connected to sound and resonance and generating huge amounts of energy with sound and resonance. The cone-shaped tools are always connected to the use of the sound by using phaser technology and levitation technology. And one of the greatest connectors to this, to complete the story, are the cone-shaped tools that were discovered in the Sumerian temples, in the walls of the temples, inscribed with cuneiform text that tell us that the cone-shaped tools were used in the building of the temples in Sumeria. And one of the cone-shaped tools actually describes the building of the temple of Inanna. So I think we've got more than enough evidence that cone-shaped tools are in fact the advanced technology that focuses the sound like a crystal in a laser, focuses the light. The cone-shaped tools focus the sound, creating phaser beams, distorting the energy, distorting the gravity, and giving us a gravity-free area with which we can levitate and move anything we want.